This starts our discussion on the Mexican national era. The Mexican national era was simply that time that after Mexico became independent from Spain. This presentation is going to include a little bit of time prior to Mexico gaining its independence, and then it's going to be talking about the time after Mexico was independent. And I'm really going to be focusing on that relationship between the new Mexican government and the Anglo settlers that were moving from the United States to colonize Texas. I really feel that like at the end of this presentation, you guys are going to understand how the individuals and events and issues throughout this Mexican era helped to shape the history of Texas. Please remember as I go along that you're filling in your blanks, you're taking notes wherever you feel necessary, and that you're answering the questions that I ask along the way. Remember, you can pause this, you can go back, you can take as much time with this as you need. That's really the beauty of the flipped classroom. The first person that I want to recap is the man named Jose Bernardo Gutierrez de Lara. When we've talked about him before, we've referred to him as Bernardo Gutierrez, and that's how I'll be referring to him throughout this presentation. Bernardo Gutierrez first started fighting for Mexican independence under the leadership of Father Miguel Hidalgo. Remember, Father Hidalgo was the Spanish priest who really felt like Mexico should be independent of the tyrannical rule of Spain. And he fought for that independence, and he encouraged revolution. After Father Hidalgo was captured and executed, Bernardo Gutierrez is going to flee to Louisiana, where he's going to meet up with a man named Augustus McGee. Together, he and Augustus McGee are going to form what will become known as the Gutierrez-McGee expedition. This expedition is going to work alongside Dr. James Long and his filibustering attempts. Remember, always trying to take Texas from Spanish rule. Well, you can't talk about the Gutierrez-McGee expedition without talking about the Battle of Medina. The Battle of Medina was and remains today the bloodiest battle ever fought on Texas soil. The battle occurred on August 18, 1813, between the Republican forces of the North. Remember, that's the Gutierrez-McGee expedition. Those forces were led by a man named General Jose de Bois, and a Spanish royalist army that was led by General Joaquin Arredondo. Again, this was the bloodiest battle ever fought on Texas soil, and it took place just 20 miles south of San Antonio. This battle happened when the Gutierrez-McGee expedition, again they called themselves the Republican Army of the North, met up and engaged in battle the Spanish army. This battle raged for 4 long hours. At the end of the battle, only 100 of the original 1,400 men in the Republican Army of the North were left alive. 1,300 men lay dead. The Spanish army only lost 55 men. The bodies of those fallen members of the Republican Army of the North, all 1,300 of them, would lay in that field in Medina for 9 long years before they were buried. Again, this bloody war would effectively end the revolutionary attempts of the Gutierrez-McGee expedition. However, this would not end the whole idea of Mexican gaining its independence. Revolutionaries would continue to fight for independence. They would be inspired by the United States, and they would be inspired by France, and in 1821, Mexico will finally gain its independence from Spain. You need to know this date, 1821, and Mexican independence. Again, this independence did not come free. It's really thanks to the contributions of people like Father Francisco Hidalgo, Bernardo Gutierrez, and Augustus McGee. You can't talk about independence without talking about the Constitution. The Mexican Constitution of 1824 established a states' rights form of government. Remember, a states' rights form of government is one in which the state shares power with the federal government. Here today in the United States, we have a states' rights form of government. Each individual state shares power with the federal government. This states' rights form of government allowed for more local control. Most settlers really liked the new Constitution because it did allow them to have more local control and have a government very much like the one they had left behind in America, in the United States. They were able to have a representative form of government. They were able to have a say in what was happening in the state that they lived in, there in Mexico. Not everyone liked this Constitution, however. Mexican nationalists did not like the Constitution, and they believed that the power should belong to the national government. Therefore, they were called Mexican nationalists. These nationalists really believed that if too many settlers moved into Texas from the United States, they might eventually try to seize Texas and have Texas join the United States. Little did they know that that was exactly what was going to happen. I included this map because I wanted to show you that Mexico was broken up into states just like the United States is today. You have here the state of Coahuila within Mexico. Under the Constitution of 1824, Texas was placed inside Coahuila to form one state that was named Coahuila y Tejas, right here. And the capital of this state was called Saltillo. Now, Saltillo was way down here in Coahuila, so you can see how the great distance between where most people lived in Texas and the capital. So these people really had a hard time relating to Coahuila as part of them, and they really kind of still considered themselves independent, even though they were part of Coahuila. And the last part I'm going to talk about in this presentation is just to recap that state colonization law of 1825. This was passed by the state government of Coahuila y Tejas, and this was the colonization law that allowed so many Anglo-Americans to move into Texas. It really reduced those requirements that you had to meet to be a colonizer of the area. Settlers would receive 4,428 acres of land for just $30. They would be exempt from paying taxes for 10 years under this plan. And again, exempt means that they did not have to pay taxes for 10 years. The biggest thing here was that they were not any longer required to be Roman Catholic. They didn't even have to agree to become Catholic. And also, if you married a Mexican citizen, you could receive an additional 1,107 acres of land. Now, all of this sounds really great, right? Well, on top of that, if you were an impresario, you received 23,000 acres of land for every 100 settlers that you brought to the state within 6 years. I have here on the slide that it's 5 years, but it's actually 6 years. You had a 6-year time period. Most of the contracts, however, were not fulfilled. And when they weren't fulfilled, that means that they were canceled. So it means that these impresarios were not able to get 100 settlers to come to the state within 6 years. Now remember, they couldn't just bring Anglos. They also had to agree to bring Mexican citizens and people from Europe. And therefore were unable to fulfill this contract. Okay, remember, I told you that I was going to ask you questions, and you were going to have to write the answer down next to the slide somewhere in the margin. Here's your first question. Why do you think that it was so hard for these impresarios to find people willing to settle in Texas? Think about everything you know, everything that I've talked about, and answer the question. Why do you think it was so hard for these impresarios to find people willing to settle in Texas? This is the end of part 1. Remember, you can go back, rewind, get everything filled in, and then watch part 2.